And welcome back to a probably tragic and depressing part two to the what is this the ghostess of
The,
Highway 20.
yeah, the ghosts of Highway 20.
The ghosts. Got to add that S in there. So this will be part dose of that. This will be our first part two series. And boy, did it get spicy early on. I don't see it getting any better. But for everybody watching, we appreciate you coming back and listening to the rest of this story. So that being said, I'm Derek Thompson, and with me always is Mr. Gabriel Brew. So I'll let him take the reins and kick us back into this nut kicking story.
Okay. So, where we left off last time was a quick introduction to how this all came about. We've talked about, uh, what's her name? Let me go back to my notes real quick, buddy.
Notes away. Somebody's got to remember these names. I can't remember. I feel
So,
like Deborah.
Marlene.
Close.
So, it starts in 1977 with Marlene Gabrielson, who gets raped by John Akroyd.
Mr. Akroyd.
And then the following year, a runner named Kay Turner is murdered while running in Camp Sherman right around Christmas of 1978. And then John's stepdaughter, Rashonda Pickle, goes missing from her home at Santiam Junction in 1990. And that is the catalyst that sets this whole story into motion, which brings all of these stories together and points it towards John.
Yeah, who just happened to know everything about how Rashonda was killed.
Right. And we got to where he has a friend's daughter in his pickup truck with him, and they meet up with two young ladies named Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson. And this is in Newport, Oregon in the year of 1992. So, Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson made their final call from a payphone in the dark. The sound of the Pacific Ocean churning in the background. The two friends had gone camping with Melissa's family at Beverly Beach State Park. A wind-swept strand of sand and headlands on the central Oregon coast. The restive pair quickly grew bored and wanted their boyfriends to pick them up. But when the men turned them down, Melissa and Sheila said they'd hitchhike instead. The teenagers had met 6 months earlier. They grew up in small towns about 90 minutes inland on Highway 20 and shared a history infused with drugs and alcohol. They were scrappy and streetwise high school dropouts. Sheila often slept away from home but stayed in touch with her mother. Melissa had a turbulent life too. She once showed up at Sheila's with bruises on her face and asked if she could stay. The two spent evenings at Sherry's restaurant along Highway 20 where they hung out with other teens and locals, including a state mechanic named John Akroyd.
That son of a bitch.
He turns up in all these stories, you know?
Somehow, some way, he's always there.
He is. By then, Akroyd was a suspected killer who had frustrated police for more than a decade. He had raped a young woman, led detectives to a runner's remains off of an isolated road in central Oregon, and was the last person to see his stepdaughter alive. Vulnerable and adrift, Melissa and Sheila knew nothing of Akroyd's sinister background when he entered their lives. Sheila, who was then 19, was the older of the two, but seemed younger. She carried her baby book as a reminder of a time when she was happy. She often wore a black leather jacket that her parents paid for on installments. At 17, Melissa was a tough talking and independent The spring camping trip to Newport was supposed to mean time with family, but she and Sheila took off the first chance they got. Melissa's parents awoke to find the young women gone, their tent empty, and assumed the two had gotten a ride from friends. When the family returned to Sweet Home later that week, Melissa wasn't there. Her father waited a few more days before calling police. Then the FBI. Word reached police in Lebanon, Sheila's hometown, that she too hadn't shown up. Local cops tracked down Sheila's mother. She'd gone around town hanging missing posters but hadn't called police. What they didn't know, the teens likely were already dead.
Likely, it's pretty much a guarantee at this point. With this crazy son of a bitch.
Well, given what we know, right?
Yeah, given everything we know, we're pretty much on spot detectives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So around that time, Marvin Laurent was working the graveyard shift at the State Highway shop in Sweet Home. Akroyd would park his personal truck there before taking a state rig to work in Corvallis. Laurent and a co-worker sat on a seat salvaged from old vans talking about the night ahead. They noticed that Akroyd's truck was still parked outside and his work rig wasn't there. That meant he was on the road, usually late. The men heard a truck pull into the yard. Strange hour for company, they thought. It was Akroyd. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and dried blood covered his arms and hands. What the heck happened to you? Laurent asked. Ran into a deer, Akroyd said. I had to gut him out. Laurent asked what Akroyd had done with the carcass. Threw him in the brush, he said. Bewildered by the explanation, the men watched as Akroyd washed up. Then he left for home. Later, they mentioned the bizarre encounter to a foreman. But the anecdote never made it past shop gossip. Laurent didn't think of it again until that fall when he heard the news on the radio that hunters had found the bodies of two young women who had vanished during a camping trip on the coast. They'd been dumped off the highway along Akroyd's route from the coast to Sweet Home. Sheila's ankles were bonded with leggings. Her sneakers and socks were still on her feet. A used rivet was discovered near the body. Investigators suspected the rivet, a quick fix used in field repairs, had fallen out of the pocket of the attacker. Part of Melissa's body were gone, probably dragged away by animals, and she was nude. The medical examiner speculated that the young women had been strangled, but the condition of their remains left it difficult to determine a cause of death. For earlier, Laurent remembered the night when a bloodied Akroyd came into the shop and it was earlier in the year, though he didn't recall the date. At the time, Laurent thought why Akroyd would be returning to the yard so late, and how come he had all this blood all over his hands. Melissa and Sheila vanished as police closed in on Akroyd in the killing of Kay Turner, who had disappeared 14 years earlier on a back road near Highway 20. Weeks after the teens disappeared, Akroyd was finally arrested for Kay's murder and booked into the Jefferson County Jail in Madras. Detectives wondered if he took a chance to kill again before his arrest. Kay had been an avid runner, deep ties to Eugene, where she worked as a manager at the local public health agency. On Christmas Eve morning in 1978, she went out for a run in Camp Sherman, where she, her husband, and friends planned to spend the holiday. She encountered Akroyd and his hunting partner on a deserted road. Months later, the highway worker led police to the wooded area where scraps of her clothing and her jawbone were found. Akroyd dodged the accusations at the time, but police revived Kay's case in 1990 amid an unsuccessful investigation to solve the disappearance of Rashonda Pickled, Akroyd's 13-year-old stepdaughter. Now, 2 years after Rashonda went missing, without a trace from the family home, the young woman who left a camping trip 2 young women who left a camping trip were dead. Within days of discovery of Melissa and Sheila's bodies, police zeroed in, once again, on the highway worker. Even before the hunters had stumbled upon the teen's remains, Akroyd told a friend, "They are assuming it's me." Police scoured his work truck. One detective took time to sketch Akroyd's loose connections to Melissa and Sheila, how he and the teenagers knew some of the same people in Sweet Home, his hometown. While recordings from his earlier police interrogations on the Kayla Turner and Rashonda Pickle cases filled hours of tape, Akroyd was silent on Melissa and Sheila. A detective reached out to request an interview. This time, Akroyd's lawyer responded. The answer was no. Just as before, police turned up no physical evidence linking him to Melissa and Sheila. Akroyd was one of the many leads they pursued. The teens had managed to build a sordid social circle in their young lives, so investigators had plenty of violent men to consider. Police at one point speculated that Melissa alleged theft of glassware from a local meth cook might have gotten them killed. None of it went.
The meth.
Yeah,
Up there.
but none of those leads went anywhere.
Damn.
2 decades pass. Sheila's parents had died, leaving her younger brother to carry on alone with his grief. Melissa's mother died too. Her father, Richard Sanders, kept her jewelry box, which looked like a miniature china cabinet, under a counter in the old trailer where he lived outside of Sweet Home. Melissa and Sheila joined a list of girls last heard from or seen late at night in coastal Lincoln County. In all, 5 teens disappeared on or around highways in the county from 1984 through 1995. Their cases lingered in the community's collective memory, and the local district attorney decided to reopen them in 2012, eager to identify potential suspects. The unglamorous task fell to Ron Benson, an investigator for the district attorney, and Linda Snow, a retired legal assistant. They complemented each other. Benson, a veteran cop who had a hand in investigating some of Lincoln County's most memorable and notorious crimes, and Snow, a quick study with an impressive memory and a knack for spinning a mountain of clues into theories. They met once a week in Benson's office to dive into thousands of papers and old files, spending hours devouring details about the case. What had the original investigators overlooked? A lawyer from Central Oregon heard the case had been reopened and called with a suggestion. Take a look at an old highway worker named John Akroyd. Benson made a 4-hour trek to a courthouse 3 counties away where a metal filing cabinet held Kay Turner's case. Snow worked the phones, digging up numbers for highway workers, many of them long retired. Over time, the two made painstaking progress. They located the women who had introduced Melissa and Sheila to Akroyd. She told them how Akroyd had once offered the young women a ride. The anecdote revealed that Akroyd knew Melissa and Sheila and that the young women were comfortable enough with him to climb into his truck. Others told the investigators that Akroyd started hanging out at Sherry's in Lebanon. After he met the teens, it was there that witnesses heard Akroyd try to lure Melissa and Sheila to a party he said he'd planned to host in Newport, just down the road from where they would be camping. Old co-workers told Benson and Snow how they'd seen Akroyd around a highway project near a gravel logging road off of Highway 20. It wasn't far from where the teens' remains were found. Akroyd was spotted there at least 3 times after they went missing. The investigators sifted through the evidence collected from the woods where hunters came across Melissa and Sheila's bodies. There was the rivet found near Sheila, and a beaded seat cushion used at the time in cars and trucks. Highway workers told them the rivet was a common part they carried on the job, and a seat cover, they said, could have been an akroyd state rig. Some workers used them to keep cool in summer months. A whiteboard went up in Benson's office. He drew an orange grid, each column dedicated to a victim assaulted or killed, likely by akroyd. First, Marlene Gabrielson, raped 1977. Kay Turner was killed in 1978, followed by akroyd's stepdaughter Rashonda in 1990. Then Melissa and Sheila in 1992. The two investigators crowded Benson's office with more whiteboards, scribbling fine points from each case. They looked for similarities, how none of the victims had been buried. For example, akroyd had once speculated to police that his stepdaughter might not have been buried either. Her body had never been found, and then there was akroyd's eerie talk of hunting. He told police he was poaching when Kay was killed. He said he'd gone to photograph wildlife when Rashonda went missing. His excuse for his bloody arms and hands around the time of Melissa and Sheila vanishing was that he had just gutted a roadkill deer. They wrote down his habit of taking time off around the disappearances he had done with Kay and Rashonda. He took off a couple of days the week Melissa and Sheila had gone camping. Late in the investigation, they heard the strange tale from a few of the old highway workers about akroyd's bloody arms. The story was secondhand and not in any of the police reports. Too good to be true, Snow thought. But what if the case turned out on that clue? Benson and Snow set out to find the men who had the strange encounter with akroyd. Highway worker after highway worker, they weren't there that night. They couldn't vouch that if it had happened. Then one finally offered, try a woman who worked on the Sweet Home shop back then. It took weeks. The woman had changed her name since the early 90s. But she remembered the men and their names. The investigators called Marvin Laurent. His voice came through the speaker. He recalled the blood, akroyd's unlikely story, and the odd timing. In the separate call, his old co-worker told the same story. Of course, they remembered. How could they forget? The investigators glanced at each other, stunned by the damning account all these years later. It was as close to a breakthrough as they'd get. 4 years after they started, Benson and Snow had strung together enough evidence to take the double murder to a grand jury. Here's their theory. Melissa and Sheila had waited until dawn to leave the family's campsite. They began walking along US 101, covering more than 6 miles to the turnoff to Highway 20. Then headed east. Akroyd, going to Newport for work that day, encountered the teenagers somewhere along the highway and offered them a lift, just as he had in the past. This time, he drove them up a logging road and into the woods. The body count tied to akroyd was now up to 4.
He's up here getting them.
Yeah. Now, we've gone through all of the known victims. Let's talk about John Akroyd for a little bit, yeah?
About how he's a giant piece of crap.
Yeah.
Apparently he got no love growing up. That's going to be my guess. Killed animals. Just kind of a psychopathic piece of shit.
You'd be right.
Or he's a fat kid who didn't get bullied enough.
You'd be wrong there. He got bullied plenty.
Nah, apparently not enough.
Deservedly so, though.
Yeah, it appears.
It appears. It appears that way. So, this is going to be throughout this whole story for the first part, and through this part, we've given like tidbits about his upbringing and his personality and like people recounting how his behavior was, right?
Right.
So this is going to be a little bit of all of it, but mostly it picks up in around like the 1993 time frame as they're closing in to make their arrests, right?
The life of John Akroyd.
Pretty much. So, John Akroyd had nothing left to say when he finally went on trial for abducting Kay Turner 15 years earlier, as she was out for a winter run along a back road off of Highway 20. He had done all his talking to investigators during hours of interrogations after Kay vanished. Those contradictions, discrepancies, and outright lies had led him to this moment. All these years later, the Turner trial would be the first step in bringing the killer to justice. This day, prosecutor Bill Hanlon told jurors, has been long in coming. For more than a month in late 1993, Akroyd sat impassively in a courtroom at the historic Jefferson County Courthouse in downtown Madras, about an hour's drive across the high desert from where Kay had disappeared. Akroyd, an opportunist who preyed on women, had worked for more than a decade as a state mechanic along the last 170 miles of Highway 20, from the Cascade foothills to the coast. He eluded police even as their suspicions about him deepened. He had already raped a young mother by the time he happened upon Kay the day before Christmas in 1978. Akroyd's explanation of his encounter with her never added up, but detectives found no physical evidence directly tying him to the killing. They filed it away unsolved. Then, Akroyd's teenage stepdaughter disappeared, and a new group of investigators reopened Kay's case. 2 more young women disappeared about a month before Akroyd was arrested and charged in Kay's death. The murder trial made headlines around the state. Kay's mother attended, but not her father. Shattered by the loss of his only child, he didn't live long enough to see the case come to a close. The jurors listened attentively and scribbled notes. They didn't hear from Akroyd, who had decided not to testify, but they heard about forensic testing on Kay's clothing. The testing, unavailable at the time of her killing, showed she'd been shot and stabbed. Prosecutors said she also had been raped. Among the witnesses was a young woman who was running in Camp Sherman on the same day as Kay. It turned out that Jane Morris had an earlier brush with Akroyd as well, months before Kay went missing. Jane, who was at the time 24, was on her bicycle headed home from a waitressing job when she noticed Akroyd standing near his pickup parked along the side of the road in Camp Sherman. He pointed a handgun at her and ordered her to stop. Jane's heart raced as she crouched over her handlebars and sped toward the nearest country store, listening for the sound of the truck behind her. In the courtroom, she turned to face Akroyd. It was the first time she'd seen him since that summer morning. For a moment, she considered how lucky she had been to escape unharmed. The trial came to a close, and Akroyd, dressed in cowboy boots, jeans, and studded belt with John in silver letters, sat and waited to hear his fate. It took the jury just 4 hours. Guilty. Even with the verdict, investigators would never really know what unfolded the morning Kay died. Akroyd had offered his hunting buddy, Roger Del Beck, as his alibi, but another jury found Beck guilty of murder in the Turner case too. Beck had bragged to family members about killing Kay. Both men received life sentences, yet neither man confessed to the police. Kay's final hours remain a mystery. At one point before the trials, investigators had returned to Camp Sherman to reenact theories of what had happened. A young deputy played Kay in scene after scene over a couple of long days as the Christmas holiday approached. The investigators, playing Akroyd and Beck, would snatch her off the road. Sometimes they would drive away and turn back to get her. In other scenes, Beck grabbed her as Akroyd looked on. The deputy ran a steady pace, the thrum of the truck approaching her from behind. She thought of how Kay must have felt. The air so cold she could see her breath. She fought back in every scene, but they all ended the same. Then it was time to go. Will McNulty, one of the detectives, suggested they run through the scene one more time for Kay. Again, the investigators playing Akroyd tried to grab the woman, only this time she wrestled the gun from his grip and pretended to fire a single fatal shot to his heart. The killer was dead. The cops cheered. Just like with Kay, detectives would never know what happened to Akroyd's stepdaughter, Rashonda Pickle, the 13-year-old, had never been found. She went missing in 1990, 12 years after Kay's killing and just down the highway. The prime suspect all along, Akroyd, wasn't charged in the case. His story about inviting the girl to photograph wildlife that morning never made sense to Rashonda's family and friends. He seemed to relish in the gruesome speculation about what had come to her. Though investigators were certain he was behind her disappearance, they couldn't prove it. The girl's mother eventually moved to California and remarried. Linda Akroyd, who now goes by the last name Monville, says she doesn't know if Akroyd molested her daughter. She denies that he beat her kids. Rashonda's brother struggled to cope with the loss of his sister. The detectives who handled her disappearance retired. Then, 2 decades later, in 2010, another detective picked up the file. Mike Harmon, a longtime investigator with the Lynn County Sheriff's Office, worried Akroyd had a shot at parole. Harmon wondered if time had softened the old highway worker and if he was ready to talk. The cops arranged to meet with the killer at Oregon's maximum security prison in Salem in the fall of 2012. Harmon's manner was low-key and friendly as he tried to gauge Akroyd's interest in pursuing parole. Akroyd wasn't sure. He had diabetes and a bad heart. He worried he'd become a burden for his family. Harmon kept the tone conversational as he directed Akroyd back to Rashonda. He took out an envelope of old photos of Akroyd, his pickups, and Santiam Junction, all from the original police file. Akroyd, who's now 63, went over the timeline of the day Rashonda disappeared, spinning the same old lies. Harmon tried to nudge Akroyd. He got creative. What if cops and prison officials arranged for Akroyd to share a Christmas or a Thanksgiving meal with his family on the outside? Would he give up the body? Akroyd wasn't interested. Harmon was more direct when he returned to the prison a second time. I work for Shani, he told Akroyd. Something bad happened to her. The prosecution is going to progress in this. Akroyd was in no mood to talk this time. I am totally innocent, he said. His breathing labored, and I'll say that until the day I die. Harmon thought back to the handful of cases from the 1970s that remained unsolved. The bodies or clothes of women and one young man found in the isolated wilderness in Lynn County, not far from Highway 20, the route Akroyd spent years traveling for the state. 2 were Jane Doe's, another a young woman from Lebanon named Elizabeth Musler, who disappeared when she was 22 and was discovered in a shallow grave. 2 more teens disappeared, but their bodies never turned up. Karen Lee was 15 and Rodney Grissom, 14, were friends, and they'd run away from home with plans to make it to California. Their final call in the spring of 1977 came from a payphone in Lebanon. Later, Karen's jeans, pages of her journal, and the blouse she had sewn for a school project were found off of a logging road. Her jeans appeared to have been cut. The clues bore a chilling similarity to 2 of Akroyd's earlier assaults. Rape victim Marlene Gabrielson's boots and underwear were sliced, and so was the waistband of Kay Turner's yellow jogging shorts. Karen's mother, Violet Gilmore, long believed Akroyd was behind her daughter's disappearance. Gilmore knew Akroyd had abducted a runner near Highway 20. She also knew he was from Sweet Home, not far from where Karen had used the payphone to call a friend in the Midwest. just 1 year before Kay Turner died. Our ride is here, Karen told her friend. I have to go. She was never heard from again. Karen's case and the others from that era were all but forgotten. No evidence, physical or otherwise, ever linked Akroyd to any of them. But their timing and proximity to Highway 20 prompted investigators to wonder if the mechanic had a hand in them. In prison that day with Akroyd, the detective took one last shot. The conversation went like this. What about the other ones, he asked. What other ones, said Akroyd. The other ones. What are you talking about? I'm talking about some of the others that are dead up in that area. Oh, Akroyd said. Now you're trying to lay some others on me. No, I'm just asking you, the detective said. I'm just asking you. I have never killed anybody in my life, Akroyd said. I thought about it, but I'd never done it. Harmon returned to Rashonda. So you don't know where she's at, he asked. Is that what you're saying? I wish I knew, Akroyd answered. Oh, I think you do. Akroyd heavied his body out of the chair. If you change your mind and want to show me, Harmon called out, let me know. The aging killer headed towards the door and returned to his cell. It was the last time any cop talked to Akroyd. A few months later, in 2013, the Lynn County District Attorney took Rashonda's case to the grand jurors. Prosecutors didn't have a body, and Harmon hadn't uncovered any physical evidence linking Akroyd to Rashonda's disappearance. But worried about the possibility of parole in the Turner case, they took their chances. Enough time had passed to conclude Rashonda was dead. A Forest Service ranger's account of seeing Akroyd that day in a snow park near Santiam Junction, hours later than Akroyd claimed, blew a hole in the highway worker's alibi. And most significantly, the teen's friends confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Akroyd had been sexually assaulting the girl before she vanished. The circumstantial case rested on a basic theory. It was unlikely that anyone but Akroyd, now a convicted killer, had harmed the girl. The grand jury returned an indictment on a single count murder. Another Oregon courthouse provided the backdrop for Akroyd's second prosecution. Rashonda's mother, Linda, didn't make the trip, and the girl's father wasn't around. The responsibility of speaking for Rashonda rested with her brother, Byron Pickle, who was at the time 37. The district attorney asked Byron if he supported a plea deal or if he wanted Akroyd to stand trial. If a jury acquitted Akroyd, it could clear the way for him to seek parole. Byron needed a moment to think. He and his wife walked out of the courthouse, where they paced and wept. He hadn't told his wife the full story of Rashonda's life and how he remained tormented that he hadn't hugged his kid sister the last time he saw her. Their childhoods had been nightmarish under Akroyd's roof. Byron recalled regular beatings. Rashonda was so uneasy living in Santiam Junction that she routinely brought a change of clothes to the school, hoping to stay with friends. Though Akroyd offered their mother stability, the teens dreamed of the day they could leave home for good. Now the district attorney could use his sister's death to keep Akroyd from hurting anyone else. I'm not going to gamble this guy getting away with it, Byron thought. And so the case reached a quiet end in the fall of 2013. Akroyd shuffled into a courtroom where Byron sat in the gallery, clutching a photograph of his sister. His wife sat by his side. Harmon, the investigator who spent hours interviewing Akroyd, was there too. Akroyd entered a no-contest plea to his stepdaughter's murder. He wouldn't admit to killing the girl, but he wouldn't deny it either. In exchange, he agreed never to seek parole. The extraordinary arrangement meant Akroyd would die in prison. As for what happened to Rashonda's body, Akroyd gave no clue. The hearing lasted about 7 minutes. When it concluded, the judge sealed the court records. The reason for concealing the documents and who insisted on secrecy have been lost to time. For years, only those in the courtroom would know what had happened. 3 years later, by the end of 2016, the two investigators who had carefully stitched together a case against Akroyd for the killings of Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson considered the work done. They believed Akroyd picked up the teens sometime after they walked away from their family camping trip on the coast. The district attorney said they had enough to take the case to a grand jury, but Akroyd was already serving a life sentence. A new prosecution would be too expensive. Case closed. In late December, as the case wrapped up, the investigators read the news. Akroyd was dead. The cause? Heart disease. The state police detective assigned to investigate the killer's death found Akroyd on the floor of his cell. His sleep apnea machine still wiring, and the breathing tube stuck in his throat, left over from last-ditch efforts to save him. His false teeth had been knocked to the floor. The state had continued to pay out Akroyd's $3,624 monthly public employee pension even while he was in prison. He stuffed his cell with food from the prison commissary, dozens of packages of processed meats and cheeses, candy bars and beans. He was beset with chronic health problems and hadn't left his cell much. His confidants were a pair of child molesters serving long prison sentences. That morning, the detectives looked around the disheveled cell and surveyed what was left. Akroyd's stash of food, a cane, and his prison-issued clothes. For decades, investigators wanted peace for Rashonda, the lonely girl who was unhappy and out of place at the highway compound. Had Akroyd left a note telling them where to find her? But there was nothing.
Just left him high and dry, but you can't expect anything different from him. I mean,
No.
it's kind of a giant pile of crap, and he was going to go out that way too.
Yeah, he never faltered on taking accountability, you know?
Yeah, so when you're going to lie, I suppose. But he wanted to be innocent the entire time, so that's what he did.
Yeah, he stuck to that. But I have a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I have an epilogue here from pretty much top to bottom of the case, and this is where it leaves you. This is a messy story with loose ends and unanswered questions. It doesn't conclude with a dramatic trial in a packed courtroom. There are no somber words from the bench about justice served, no deathbed confessions. There was no chance to give Rashonda a proper burial. Kay's remains sat forgotten in the Jefferson County Courthouse until 3 years ago, when the court staff came across them. They were turned over to her husband and cremated. Mystery still shrouds much of what happened during Akroyd's final encounters with his victims, and that's not likely to change in that way. The story feels unresolved. Maybe that's why these are the cases that stuck with investigators. Like Mark Foster, one of the cops who worked on the Kay Turner investigation, he returned to duty last year as a volunteer deputy with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. He spent Christmas patrolling Camp Sherman, quietly marking Kay's disappearance decades earlier. And Bill Hanlon, the prosecutor who helped put Akroyd away, he runs in Kay's memory every Christmas Eve. Two of the victims' brothers have quietly suffered for years. Today, both men insist they should have done more to protect Sheila Swanson and Rashonda Pickle from a killer. Once in a while, Bart Swanson makes his way to the isolated logging road where Sheila's body was found just feet from her friend, Melissa Sanders. He lies down in the dirt and stares up. Is this what his sister saw before she died? Rashonda's brother Byron still sees her so clearly. Her sweet features framed by brown hair, her face and name are tattooed on his left bicep, a memorial to the aunt his children never knew. The last time the two saw each other, Rashonda was in the back seat of a Chevy Blazer headed home. A father himself now, Byron gets a little catch in his voice whenever he talks about it. Kay's husband, Noel, remarried. He's a grandfather now. Though they had grown apart in their marriage, he remembered Kay with fondness. She was a bright and witty woman who seemed destined to live a full life. Then there's Akroyd's first known victim, Marlene Gabrielson, the one who got away. In 1977, she told police that Akroyd had raped her, and they didn't believe her. She lived in Hillsborough with her husband. They raised 3 kids, and she went on to work at a local bank. She didn't talk much about what had happened. Why bother? No one listened all those years ago. And then she agreed to tell her story. Over the course of hours of interviews with local news outlets, she unburdened herself over every ugly detail. She was at times enraged and guilt-stricken. She had tried to warn police about Akroyd. And then Kay and Rashonda, and Melissa and Sheila are dead. Victims of sexual assault often ask to remain anonymous. They don't want the stigma and the shame associated with these crimes. But Marlene Gabrielson wants you to remember her name. She told the truth a long time ago. Police officers, investigators, and the judicial system are over 40 years too late in finally believing her story.
Unbelievable. Incredibly well told, and, well, at least we got some semblance of justice out of it.
Yeah.
Died in a cell, but just, a wood chipper probably would have been more kind.
Agreed. I think putting him in a wood chipper would have been too nice of a punishment for somebody like him,
It's unbelievable. Yes. How you managed to get away with that crap for that long, it's just kind of mind-boggling, really.
Brother, that's 40 years.
Yeah, 40 years to get away with it and just have no repercussions for your actions.
Yeah. Like, think of, I don't know, dude, you think about crime now and like how you commit a crime and in less than a week you're behind bars because of the technology that we have now, right?
Well,
This motherfucker
just
went
because of lack
40
of,
fucking years because of the lack of technology for investigators to tie him to any of these cases.
the dude had the same story for every freaking one, too. I hit a deer.
Yeah.
It was a hunting accident.
Yeah, I was hunting. It was a hunting accident. I had to gut out a roadkill deer.
Yeah, I had to get out a roadkill deer so that it wouldn't rot. What?
And then, like,
The math ain't math, my man.
if you go back and if he would have not let Marlene Gabrielson live, his name never would have made it to police
At all.
ever. And this might never, we might not know the story ever because of that one reason alone. That one decision to let her live and her giving his name and then all these similar things happening and his name comes up every time, right?
Yeah, and they finally, stick him because they know.
Yeah.
Dickwad just won't admit it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's one of those stories that I found at the time, like one that you get invested into it and you can't stop,
Right.
And so for whatever reason, I don't know why I thought it'd be a good one to tell because it was hard to tell. I don't know if you caught moments. I don't know if you caught those moments where I was like, I gotta.
Hard to get through.
I gotta pull away a little bit because my throat's choking up, But there is on YouTube, there is a 5-part series or a 6-part series of this case that you can get on and watch. It's like a documentary, and it's on YouTube. If you just type in Ghost of Highway 20, it'll pull it up.
It'd be a good one to watch for sure. And then, but do that after you've listened to our recanting of it, obviously.
Well, they're not going to hear it unless they listen,
Yeah, so make sure you've listened to this and then like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the stories that we tell, and just have fun with it. But that being said, like we said last episode in the first part, if you are a victim, don't be afraid to reach out. There are resources for you. They're provided in the last link or last episode's description. We've got them in there. Just don't be afraid to speak out. I know it's hard. I know it's almost impossible sometimes, but you got to say something sometimes. Otherwise, nobody's going to know. And then you end up with this kind of situation where a guy gets away with it for 40 years. Even the one lady did speak out. Don't let that be a reason for you not to.
Well, yeah, and like he got caught after 40 years because she did speak out. Imagine had she not said anything or not survived that encounter. Like
he hadn't led them to him at all, then this wouldn't be a thing. So,
yeah.
Well, that being said, wrap up this episode, and hope you guys have sweet dreams and a good night. And yeah, it's gonna be hard to after that, but I'm gonna root for you. I'm gonna root for you.
Yeah, we're on your side.
Good luck trying to sleep. Okay, bye.
Bye.